Today what I want to do is I want to talk about my strategy of the properties that I have access to, knock on door permission properties and public land, and how I create my bow hunting strategy throughout the entire year utilizing these particular properties. Let's go over all of that right now. So the system that I utilize for my knock on door permission properties, just so you know, I have 13 of them this year, and they're all very small. They go from 2 acres, 3 acres, 7 acres, 8 acres, and the biggest one I have is 35 acres. And what I do essentially is I put a cell camera on each property, and then usually this time of year, end of October-ish, 4 or 5 of those properties will have what I'm looking for. The rest, not so much, and that can change from year to year. And that's how I essentially, my knock-on-door permission property work year after year. Now you have to understand a lot of these properties are what I like to call sliver properties, meaning they are a sliver into the bigger pie. They're not just, 2 acres of woods or 7 acres of woods. They are into a property that has the recipe to usually hold a big buck. Now, with that being said, the properties, because they are so small, for the most part, also do not have buck bedding on them. A few of the properties I have access to do have buck bedding on them, but most of them do not. So now it becomes more of a timing mechanism than trying to find these big bucks. And I'm basically setting up on these properties, knowing that a big buck is eventually going to come through. It's just a matter of when, and that becomes the hard part. So let's kind of talk about how we time these big bucks, at least how I time them, and know when to go after them. So there's a lot of variables on what's going to create a buck to move. We know that the closer it is to the rut time frame is going to make them move. We know that cold weather also plays a very important role in that. And then there's some other minor variables. One that I've really been keeping an eye on the last few years is dew point or humidity. The lower the dew point, the lower the humidity, the more likely that they are going to move. It's just like a person, if you do a lot of walking outside, a lot of cardiovascular activities outside, you can tell when that dew point's a little higher, and it makes it a little bit harder for you, and deer are no different. And I've noticed that through matching up cell camera pictures and video to weather underground dew points over the years. So that's one thing I really kept a close eye on. Now, one variable that I do not pay much attention to, and I used to pay as much attention as I could to it, were moon phases. If anything, a full moon at night without clouds, they tend to be extremely active during that evening phase, but they don't like to during the daytime as much. So moon phase is just one of those things I just do not put into my equation. You might do so. You might find it to be very valuable, but for me, I don't make it a part of my equation as far as the timing portion of when to go after a particular buck. I am trying to catch most of these bucks during that pre-rut, rut time frame, which means funnels per se. But it's how you treat these particular properties, at least my case, because they're so small, I have to treat them with gloves on, the white glove treatment, if you want to call it that. And I am a believer in scent control and the amount of scent that you lay down. So because they are so small, for instance, if I go on a particular property just to, let's say, move a stand, or if I went to go check a trail camera, mess with the mock scrapes that are on the particular property, now all that buck has to do is go 300 yards around from where he smelled me on one of these small sliver properties, and I will never see him again, even though he's in that bigger swamp, the bigger woods. And I have to make sure that that property that I hunt on, he feels safe and he feels confident to be on. And that's not always easy to do for, I think, most people, to stay out of that property and maybe only be on that property once to twice a year. Now, this is why I also like to utilize mock scrapes. They become extremely important when I hunt these sliver or tiny properties. And there's a couple different advantages. The first advantage is that it brings other deer to a particular area. The doe families, they like the mock scrapes, they like to put their scent out there. And the more deer I can bring to a particular spot, the more scent they leave. The more scent they leave, the more other deer are like, you know what, there are other deer that have been here. This is safe. It's a community spot. We're fine here. We're going to be okay, you know. So for me, the mock scrape helps in that factor. Now, this is why it's so important, at least for me, to utilize mock scrapes, because the mock scrape acts as a focal point for scent, if you want to call it that. So let's take out the word focal and let's just replace it with scent point. And when those winds blow downwind, they're going to catch these bucks as they come through and are, you know, doing their thing. And on a very small property, if you can pull a buck 300, 400, 500 yards just due to scent alone into your property just to check it, you get a picture or a video of him being there, and then in the future he may come through there again, knowing that that particular mock scrape is already there. So those mock scrapes, to me, are very important when you're hunting these very small properties. The timing factor of when to go after a buck on these small knock-on-door permission properties is probably the hardest component. One thing that I know is that these big bucks do not like to repeat a process on highly pressured properties. And if you think about it, if it's a sliver property here, you usually have multiple sliver or landowner properties that border that property that you hunt, which usually means there's more human activity, whether they're bow hunters or maybe just people that are messing around down near the woods. And these bigger bucks know that. I get a ton of pictures that are nighttime travel throughout the entire season, all the way up until close to that Halloween time frame. And it's usually around that Halloween time frame that I make my move on these particular bucks. Now, once again, if I get a picture of a big buck, let's say on a Friday night, and he comes through 10 minutes before legal shooting light, you know, you're going to get excited and you'll be like, okay, the next night I'm going to set up on that particular spot. You go there and he doesn't show, nowhere to be found. They don't like to repeat that same process 2 days in a row, but they will repeat that process down the road. The key is to be able to catch them when they do. And for me, it's when a lot of these variables come together, and that's, once again, a cold weather, cold snap, humidity or dew point dropping, and then the closer you are to that Halloween weekend, you know, before and then after, and that's when the rut starts shortly after here in Wisconsin, that first week in November, and then being in that tree when all of these variables line up. And even that's not a slam dunk, but you're just trying to time it the best you possibly can. Now, another thing is when you're hunting these small properties, like I said, I can't make too many mistakes. I technically don't usually hunt mornings on these particular properties. If I do hunt a morning, it's usually that I hunt it after I was there the following or the previous evening. So because my scent is already there, I'll just go in that morning, and if I have a stand that's already pre-hung, or maybe I'll leave my mobile system up, I'll go in that following morning and hunt it. But because, once again, like I said, they're so small, it comes down to the timing factor of when to be on these particular properties. And that's essentially how I hunt my knock-on-door permission properties. Now, another strategy that I've utilized in the past, and essentially this is how I got my gun buck last year, is that if I see a buck active on a cell cam in morning, we'll call it right at legal shooting light, or maybe shortly thereafter, and you were, should have been in that particular property, there seems to be a very good chance that in the evening, he will also be there as well. That's one thing that I have noticed, at least with cell cams, and then sits as well, that if a good buck is showing himself shortly after daylight or legal shooting light in a particular spot, there's a very good chance he's going to show himself sometime in that afternoon or right before legal shooting light again. So always put that in your back pocket. And once again, that's another green light for me to go sit a particular spot, is if he shows himself in that early morning legal shooting light, or maybe even just a little bit before. Now, I have public land that I hunt, near where I live. And these particular public land spots, They are usually out of the way spots that are either way far in the very back or way in the very front. It tends to be somewhere in the middle. That's where everybody else goes. And I tend to avoid those particular spots. And this is the public land, like I say, that's more closer to home. And I do have a couple of cameras that I did go back into public land. And right now, this year, I'm not getting what I'm really looking for. I had one nice buck show up one time on my camera, just kind of a freak accident, I think, that he came through there. But that can definitely change at any time. And at that point, if that happens, I'll be going in immediately after them. And the public land spots are just a way for me to take pressure and to be able to be out in the deer woods and not booger up my knock-on-door permission properties. Now, the big woods of northern Wisconsin, what I concentrate most on over there is swamps and water. I know that some people will like the high ground. Some people will, if there's a little hill country in their section of the big woods of northern Wisconsin, at least, they'll like to go into that route. But for me, the water has always been my thing. I think I know swamps and water the best. So that's what I tend to focus on. Whenever you're hunting the big woods, funnels, within funnels is what I tend to look for. And in most cases, it's usually evergreens in a hardwoods. Sometimes it's an area where actually evergreens just become more dense than the evergreens that surround the outer portion of it. But I am setting up usually on these particular funnels that go in and out of these big swamps. And sometimes they're just areas where the swamp will actually narrow down a little bit, or the wet area will narrow down, and I will just be in that wet area. And I mentioned this in the past, I look for trifectas in these big woods swamps, meaning there's usually 3 different topographies that come together. And whenever you see those 3 different topographies, especially assuming that they're not too available to the naked eye when it comes to the Onyx or the mapping systems, those are the particular areas that I like to focus on and like to hunt. There's something about trifectas where those 3 topographies come together on public land. I'll be honest with you, I can stare at the same set of trees one day, all day, but 2 straight days, it gets a little boring to me. And I've just found out the more you can cover ground on big woods, the more odds are that you're going to come across hot sign, or you're just going to find that activity that's going on. And sometimes it's just finding that doe that's actually coming into estrus, and you might get a bunch of smaller bucks that are getting active and geared up in a particular area. Then you know that the big boys are going to be coming shortly thereafter, if not later that day. So just being more mobile, being more active in the big woods is, to me, the key. And then finding those particular spots, those funnels, and sitting them, and then just experience. It's just the more you hunt the big woods, the better you get at it. That's all I can say. And there's something to be said about being able to get a big woods public land buck. I've talked about with wolves in the past, I'm going to mention this again, is that if I have wolves howling nearby, let's say I get set up early in the morning and I hear wolves doing their thing, I will leave that particular area. I know that big bucks also do the same. If I see wolf tracks that are fresh, wolf scat that is fresh, I will just literally leave a particular area and I'll go maybe 5, 10, 15 miles away from that particular spot. But being mobile, I am always looking for that hot sign, and then what I do with my Onyx, I am looking for these spots, what I call an end spot. And that end spot means that it's a spot where when I set up, I know that I have a good chance of getting on a big buck. But if I come across hot sign or a bunch of rubs or a bunch of scrapes on my walk to that particular spot, I will set up right there, and then I can save that end spot for maybe the next day. I don't ever want to let hot sign just slide by. I've learned that when stuff is hot, to set up on it at that particular time frame. If you don't mind, please hit the subscribe button. And once again, my way doesn't mean it's the right way, doesn't even mean it's the best way. It's just the only way that I know how because of my experience and the properties that I have access to. And once again, I'm just sharing with you the properties that I hunt and why I hunt the way I do. And then maybe for some of you going forward, that'll give you a little bit better understanding of why I do what I do when I'm in the deer woods. All right, folks, well, good luck. If you go out here bow hunting in the next couple of weeks, it should be really, really good here in late October. And hopefully you can put a big buck in the truck no matter what type of property you're hunting. Until next time, Clint from Oak and Iron Outdoors.